We are at a critical time in the unfolding of the stories of the Hebrew in the book of Genesis. Actually, we are nearing the end of the book of Genesis. In a couple of weeks, we'll be starting the book of Exodus. But we are at a crossroad, really. This is the moment where perhaps not, Jacob and his sons will or will not make the journey to Egypt. And in so doing, to begin this process that we will see unfolding in the rest of the Torah of enslavement, great suffering, ending with an outcry that brings redemption and eventually revelation. The rabbis often debate because they have nothing else to do. When was the moment in the book of Genesis that we can pinpoint to say this was the clinching moment, that was the decisive factor, the event with a capital E, from which the story of Egypt unfolded? I mean, some go way, way back. It was when Abraham received the first Lech Lecha, the first call to go. This was the moment where the rest of our going to Egypt really started. If you really look back, you can see how the dominoes fit one after the other, right? Others say, no, it wasn't this one, it was that one, or it was that. Anyways, there's 24 we can point to, but none as clear as the one that we find in this Torah portion. The moment that Jacob is actually going to make that decision. Because he wasn't certain. I'll explain. But I'll first give you a little bit of the background because we haven't met for a while. Last time we met it was Hanukkah, so we didn't really talk about the Torah. You may not have followed the story in the book of Genesis up until now. I understand. So because we are on the tail end of the Torah, we are in fact, the Torah of the book of Genesis, we are in fact following the end of the story of Joseph. Okay? Joseph is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And if you know or remember, Joseph was the favorite son of Jacob, so much so that he drove all of the rest of his brothers completely jealous of him. It was unbearable. And at some point, the 11 brothers decided to get rid of him. Him and his gorgeous multicolored dream coat. Or technicolor, I don't know. They wanted to kill him, but one of them, Reuben, said, we should not kill him. That would not be a good thing. Let's just sell him into slavery, which at the time was a death sentence because very few people lived long enough to actually survive slavery. So it was a way of saying, we are going to just let somebody else do the job. For the next 20 years, Joseph lives through major up and downs in his life, major twists and turns. And I'm not going to go through all of them because 20 years is a long time. But it turns out that Joseph had a gift from the beginning, that he was able to interpret dreams. And at some point, when he's down in Egypt, in jail, Pharaoh has a dream, and Joseph is called upon to tell Pharaoh what his dream meant. And this is the dream that Pharaoh had that said, as Joseph eventually translated for Pharaoh, that there will be 7 years of plenty in the land with abundance of food, and then 7 years of famine. Pharaoh is very impressed, and he makes Joseph in charge. It's like, if you understand this, I need you to run the country. And he makes Joseph the viceroy of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. And so over the years, Joseph is transforming himself. He starts to speak the local language. He speaks Egyptian. He looks like an Egyptian. And then at the end of the 7 years, as Joseph has hoarded the surplus of the every year's crop, famine, as predicted, strikes the Middle East. And every other clan and every other tribe comes begging down in Egypt for food in order to survive. And you can imagine that this was the moment that Egypt really became the major country in the known world. They made people pay a dear price for the food that he could buy. And not unlike anybody else, Jacob and his remaining sons decide that it's also a good idea to go down to Egypt and beg for food, lest they die, lest they starve and die. And so he sends his son down to Egypt, and they are received at Pharaoh's court by Joseph, who recognizes them, but they don't recognize him anymore. He has the Yule burner look, and it was very different from, the bearded Semites of Canaan. And I'm skipping a few Torah portions because there's a whole back and forth between the brothers, between Joseph and his brothers. But eventually, to make a long story short, after all this back and forth, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, tells them who he is and how he got there, forgives them immediately, which they were very grateful for, and tells them, go back to Canaan and bring the whole clan, bring the tribe, bring my father and the rest of the tribe down to Egypt. I promise to give you the most fertile of all land, the land of Goshen in Egypt. You can settle there and not have to worry about anything. I'll take care of you. So the sons go back to their father Jacob and give him the news. And you can imagine, Jacob, after 20 plus years, having thought his son dead, is elated to learn that he is in fact alive. And immediately he's like, oh my God, let's pack our stuff. We got to go, guys, come on. He's so excited. But, it takes time to pack a whole tribe, a whole clan. There's a lot of them, and, you can't put everything on the camels. It takes a while. And as the preparation go on, Jacob is starting to have doubts. He starts to have doubts because he remembers the prophecy that his grandfather Abraham received from God. God told Abraham, as Jacob remembers, that his people will be enslaved and suffer for 400 years down in Egypt. He remembers his father Isaac. God had told his father Isaac to never ever step foot in the land of Egypt. And so Jacob, suddenly he's unsure. His heart yearns for seeing his son again, but on the other hand, he's putting, it seems, his whole tribe, his whole family at great risk. Maybe the ethical thing to do would be to stay in Canaan and try to ride the famine. So instead of directly crossing over through the Sinai to get into Egypt, Jacob decides to take one more step. He decides to go south first to the Negev and to stop in Be'er-Sheva. In Be'er-Sheva, he knows that place to be a great place to receive guidance from God, because that's where his father heard in a vision what God was telling him for his life. So he decides to bring everybody down to Be'er-Sheva with him. And lo and behold, what happened to his father happens to him as well. He has a vision in the middle of the night. God appears to him and reassures him. God says to him, it's okay. You can go. And I will make you a great nation there. And that's the moment. You can look at all the moments before that, but really that's the moment where Jacob says, okay, we're going. And so we went. Now, the philosophical implications of Jacob's decision is going to puzzle the rabbis and create great debates again through generations between them. And the question they ask is, did the path of our becoming a great nation have to go through Egypt? Did we really have to endure slavery and suffering for generations in order for us to become the people we were meant to become? Did we really have to go through this horrendous experience in order for us to find salvation and ultimately experience realization, experience awakening, experience transmission at Sinai, revelation? And obviously, when the rabbis debate these kind of things, they go back and forth. Some say, oh, yes, absolutely. Some say, no, not at all. My life experience is telling me that, in fact, yes, we do. Because that's the way it happens for us. I'm going to give you a really bad example, because that's what I have. I'm going to give you a bad example. I lived in Israel for a long time, and my experience of the young Israelis, the teenagers, was that overwhelmingly, they were a bunch of very aggressive, obnoxious, arrogant, narcissistic teens. I mean, time and again, that was my experience. It was pretty sad. But then, they go to the army. And for 2 or 3 years, they serve in the Israeli army. And when you meet the same Israelis in the early 20s, mid-20s, they have transformed into responsible, grounded, decisive young adults. And it's really shocking, the contrast. And it is in the searing crisis or the searing moment of those years that I think the transformation happens. Those of us more or less familiar with the 12 Steps program know that liberation can only happen after a major crisis that is called, hitting rock bottom. From that place, the possibility of healing begins. It's like we need the crisis. And we all know that. I mean, those of us who have, and I think all of us have, gone through several, maybe some life crisis moment, know that those are the times we really grow, we really learn, we really change. And I think if that is true, and I think it is true, if that is true on the individual level, I think even the more so is that true on the communal level, on the even national level. That in fact we grow as people from crisis to crisis. We wish that our evolution as a human race would be smooth, but in fact that's not the way it happens. We evolve from crisis to crisis. And history is a great teacher of that. We can look through history and see the mile markers that have really changed, the evolution of consciousness, what happened in each of those moments. You can just, I'm not going to go back thousands of years, but just go back about 300 years, the time where there was a consciousness that was arising from thousands of years of living in kingdoms under the rules of kings. That's all we had known for generations, to suddenly this awakening to this thing called democracy. People declaring universal human rights. The rise of this concept of individual. We didn't have a concept of beings being individuals. All this comes to shake up consciousness in that moment. And suddenly there is the possibility of this even creation of this new group of people called the middle class that never happened before. Who are, what? But the arrival of democracy, of the capitalistic bourgeoisie that arrived 300 years ago, we didn't arrive in Paris, in London, in New York and said, okay, you kings, if you could leave now. We're starting something else, right? The unraveling and the destruction of the previous level of consciousness ended in great conflict, wars, revolutions, the invention of the guillotine, great stuff, right? This is how it happened. The kings didn't go silently into the night. They fought for it, and they lost. I believe that we are in such a place right now in human history. I believe that we are on the verge of the next leap in consciousness. We are right now on the verge of moving into a kind of understanding of the world that we have no idea what it might look like yet. And I believe that what's coming next, because we have seen already our institution unraveling. The institutions that were born about 100, 150 years ago that have sustained us to this point are really no longer fitting what's happening today. I'm thinking our school system, but I'm thinking of political system, the way our economy is run. I mean, it's all starting to deteriorate and fall apart. If we see it, we can witness that. So I think what's coming next, because the pattern has always been the same, is crisis. A major crisis is upon us. And I don't know what it's going to look like, and I don't know how long it's going to last. But outside of that, there is a rebirth that is also happening at the same time. God is evolving. God is evolving to the next level of consciousness, and we are the beings through which that evolution is manifesting. We are the ones giving birth to the next stage of God's evolution. And if you haven't really paid attention, we have already followed the, how do you call that? The archetypal, that was the word I was looking for, the archetypal Jacob into Egypt, right? Doesn't the world feel tight right now? Very constricting, like we want to break it up, and it's ready to explode somehow? Well, that's Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim in Hebrew means narrow place. See, that's what happened when you're about to birth something. First, you are nicely ensconced in the womb, and it's spacious, and it's nice, and it's warm. Then the waters break. And then you're going to be born. And in order to be born, you have to go through this really narrow birth canal. And it feels very narrow. And that's really what we are experiencing. What happens in the story? What happens next? The plagues. The crisis moment. The plagues. The 10 plagues in Egypt. You know, in Egypt, the 10 plagues, each of the plague addresses one of the gods of Egypt. We start with the Nile, plague number 1. I'm not going to go through the 10 plagues, but plague number 9 is darkness. That's the god Ra, the sun, in Egypt. And the last one is Pharaoh. Pharaoh is one of the gods of Egypt, right? The death of the firstborn. How do you bring down Pharaoh? So each time, each plague tears apart, destroys the pillars that sustained the myth of Egypt. Well, that's what's going to be. Each of the plagues that are upon us are going to destroy the pillars that have sustained this level of consciousness. The truth, the beliefs, the institutions. And as those get destroyed through this moment of crisis, we are the ones to begin dreaming a different vision for tomorrow. And that's our job right now. Because we can't wait. We have to start tonight. Did you bring a pencil and a pen? Because I'm serious. We have to start dreaming something else. And it's not going to be a better yesterday tomorrow. It's not like, let's take what we have now and tweak it a little bit so that it will look a little bit better. We've tried that. It's not going to work. There's going to be a real break. There's going to be a real break. It's going to look really different. Really different. I think that, and I've said that I think in the class last night, but we for hundreds of years have defined the value of ourselves in a society based on the work that we do. That's what has defined our goal. Our schools are meant to prepare us to play that role in the society we live in. I think that is going to be gone. I think we're going to have to redefine who we are as human beings in this new society. Because the world of jobs is going to be replaced by robots and computers. There's not going to be the world of jobs that we've been accustomed to feed into out of schools that are meant to prepare us for that. So we're going to have to change the school system as well. But what is it going to look like if we are no longer defined by the jobs that we have to embody in this society? If suddenly there are no jobs, again, it's going to be very interesting. I don't have a magic wand to take us 20 years from now, but it's happening really fast. But it is our job now to source the discovery of the future within ourselves. And that's why I believe that we as a spiritual community have a great role to play in that. In fact, we may be the ones that have the greatest role to play in that. Because we are practiced in looking within and listening to the still small voice that is calling, that is telling us, that is guiding us to what's next. And we're going to need to source that within ourselves. It is not going to happen on the outside. It's going to have to awaken from within us. Within the silence, the meditative silence of the heart. And that gets me to the name of God. In a few Torah portions, we learn what God's name is, because Moses is going to ask God what God's name is, and God is going to tell Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which we have rightfully translated, I am as I am. But for once, allow me to translate that from a literal level. I don't do that often, but in this case, it is absolutely relevant. Another way of translating Ehyeh asher ehyeh, the name of God, is in fact, I will become that which I will become. Because God is, in its very name, continuously evolving. It is evolving, she is evolving through us, as us. It's always changing, always growing. But God needs us to grow. Because we are the hands, the mouth, the minds to imagine where the next evolution of God might stand. And I think it's pretty exciting. I don't think this is a doomsday scenario. We might get through some pretty tough times coming up, but I think it's really exciting. And it's an opportunity for us to be active participant in the evolution of God. To me, there is no better program than that. So let's start tonight. Let's start dreaming. Let's start dreaming tomorrow.